strategic plan update, and that is about the Avalon Bay development. Planning Director Kugel will report.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, back in April when we had our last strategic planning retreat, the Council gave assignments to myself and the Public Works Director together to provide updates on several projects, and this is the last one that we were asked to provide an update on. So what I'll be doing tonight is going through the Avalon Bay development, which is a very prominent development in the community at the corner of Route 66 in Glendora, as it's under construction right now, and go through the project and the basis for the project, and hopefully answer a lot of the questions that the community may have about what's going on and why is it going on at that location. One of the things I want to point out, and this isn't directly related to this project, but I think there's this development and other developments going on in town, and the planning department provides on the city's website a web page dedicated to major development in the community. There's plans, there's staff reports, other detailed information about projects even before they're noticed for public hearings. So anytime, if you're at home and here's a picture of the web page, I know the city provides a lot of information, so it may seem like it's buried, but under planning, current projects, you can find a list of all the major projects in the community. You can search for projects on a property basis with our permitting system, and there's also a comprehensive list of all zoning applications that are currently pending. So that's just one of the ways, in addition to the noticing, the signs that we put on projects as they get public notice, that we try to inform the public about what's going on. But I know sometimes it's hard to find, so I wanted to make the point about that. Also, in terms of the process, just to give an example with a project like this, even a project like this, which is meets the zoning code or the code for development at this location, it still took over a year to process this application, and above is a list of the meetings that were held, as well as the basic steps that were taken between December of 2011 and February 2013, when this project was approved by the City Council. The Planning Commission saw this item, I think, 3 times through that, and in all those occasions, I believe we had noticed the public about those meetings that occurred. And lastly, in February 13, the project was approved on the 26th of that month, and later that year in October, I believe, is when they broke ground on the project, October 2013. So we're about a year into the project right now. Just to give a summary of the development, it's a 280 unit apartment mixed-use project with 4,000 square feet of commercial, which will be located on the Glendora side of the development. The project is what's called a wrap-style development, where a parking structure or subterranean parking, but usually it's above ground parking, is located in the center of the project with the residential units wrapped around the project. So the first item that was constructed on this project was the parking structure, and I'm sure everyone heard all sorts of comments. What are they building? Is it a jail? No, it's a parking structure for a residential development. And at the very early stages of construction, I can understand why people were wondering what was going on if they hadn't followed the public hearing process, etc. The project is the units range in size are 1 to 3 bedrooms. The site is about 5 acres, and I'll better explain the site and how it was assembled as I go through this. And it's about the density of the project is about 50 units per acre, which is among the highest densities that are allowable in the city, and the reason is the zoning and the proximity to the future Gold Line station. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that. The zoning itself is the Route 66 plan, specific plan town center mixed use subdistrict. And as the project goes under construction, we are told by Avalon Bay that they are shooting to have the first units occupied by spring of 2015. And I believe my last conversation with Mr. Gutierrez from Avalon Bay, they hope to have the project fully leased by next August. So with that, let me start out with talking a little bit about the zoning. And I think it's important, a key element about how we review projects is always based on a zoning code and development standards. Just like when you go into City Hall and you want to pull a permit for a home addition, and you pull a building permit, your project needs to comply with the building code, and that is exactly the same way the zoning code works. We measure every application, every property owner's desire to do something with their property based on a set of rules, a set of laws of the city that are outlined within the zoning code. And it's our job, as we come to you, to the decision-making body, to make sure that the project meets those development standards as the city has adopted those development standards for each development. In this specific case, the development of the Route 66 specific plan took several years. It started in the late 1990s under an Elastic Corridor Committee, which was a steering group which was formed to look at the Route 66 corridor, because the city was, in general, apparently unhappy with the results that the existing zoning was able to attract in terms of new investment. There were a number of ill-configured parcels, smaller subdivided parcels, carved-out parcels from larger parcels, which resulted in marginal uses on many properties. There were older, mobile home parks, trailer parks, many used car, uses that the city wanted to try to change. So this Elastic Corridor Committee looked at these issues, looked at the corridor, and came up with a series of recommendations that were ultimately incorporated into a specific plan, a Route 66 specific plan, which itself had a series of workshops and public outreach, etc., that culminated with its adoption in 2003. And now that set of regulations and rules governs every property on Route 66. So if someone buys property, a property owner comes to us, we go to that rule book and we are able to advise people what they can do with the development of the property. There's the Town Center Mixed Use Subdistrict as a subdistrict of the specific plan, and I think in December I'll get into details about how the specific plan itself works, but just suffice to say at this point that the specific plan, it traverses the entire corridor of the Route 66, and it is divided up into 7 subdistricts. The subdistrict around Glendora and Route 66 is meant to be oriented around vertical, more dense mixed-use development, and it's purposely designed that way. A main reason is in anticipation of the future Gold Line station coming to this area. At the time, a lot of planners, both locally here and regionally in a lot of cities throughout the San Gabriel Valley and the region, were doing land use planning for the future Gold Line stations, because one of the things the Gold Line will do is reduce car trips, reduce traffic. You have fewer far-flung communities where you have to have roads and water and everything else going hundreds of miles out to Victorville, where you can design housing that serves all types of folks who want to live in various communities and be closer to transit, as well as other amenities like the Albertson Shopping Center within walking distance, or the village within walking distance. And so those are some of the main ideas about that behind the zoning itself. The city has been, in one way or another, after adopting the Route 66 specific plan at this particular location, working with one or more different property owners and developers who have come to the city to develop the site under the Route 66 specific plan with a mixed-use project like the Town Center Mixed-Use Subdistrict calls for. Beginning in about, I think, 2004, 2005, the Morgan Group approached the city, and in 2006, the city approved on this part, or a portion of this parcel, and I'll show the site plan and how that evolved, a 161-unit project that was mixed use with 11,500 square feet of commercial. It was a wrap project like this, so there was a parking structure in the middle, same as this project that we approved back in 2006. But as a result of the recession, when the real estate market took a nosedive along with every other area of the economy because of the banking crisis and other issues, this project never moved forward, and it ultimately went into default. So here is just an elevation. I pulled this out from, I know it's not the best elevation in the world, but it was the only one I could find from this project. I think this is probably the Route 66 elevation. And just so you know, I'll repeat, this project is not getting built. This is not the project that was approved. I repeat, just so it's clear, not the project that was approved will not get built. But this was approved in 2006 and then was never built. As a comparison, just by the numbers, the Morgan Group project was on a 3.25 acre site, whereas the Avalon Bay project acquired additional property, and the site is about 5.5 acres. So the number of units is 280 on Avalon Bay versus 161 at the Morgan Group project. The commercial space is about twice as large, although still 11,500 feet to 4,000 square feet, almost 3 times as large. So there was a fair amount of more commercial space. The density is the same. Both were 50 unit to the acre projects. And the height of the buildings were 3 and 4 stories in both cases. The Morgan Group, at its highest point with the building, was 59 feet, and the Avalon Bay was a little bit smaller, although not noticeably, really, at 54 feet. This is the site that ultimately really is going to be developed with the Avalon Bay project that's under construction. I think you can see really clearly some of the things that the specific plan was trying to address. You have a number of very small parcels. You have parcels that are clearly where a majority of it is used for storage or not being used for anything at all. This yellow area that I'm outlining now, this is the area that was approved and cleared for the Morgan Group project. I think historically this was at one time used as the Chrysler Dodge dealership, and then it was subsequently sold, and ultimately the Morgan Group came in. When Avalon Bay approached the city, knowing what the Route 66 specific plan said, they went out and look to acquire additional property in this area, because there are a number of other small parcels where over time, as those units age, the city was concerned through its specific plan as to how are those going to be reused in the future. And most of these improvements out here, although they've been cleared now, were 50 years plus in terms of age. So nothing is forever, and at some point in time these things were going to have to be reused for other uses. So they acquired the veterinarian property, the Midas Muffler property. This was a vacant, I think, former auto repair, and there was a house on it. So again, a mix of auto repair and a home were not really consistent uses. This property, another example of a long and narrow property where you can see the entire back of this property isn't being used at all, and there was an old stereo shop in the front. And this is one of the most interesting ones. This is the former Glendora Auto Tire, where you had an auto tire repair. You had a single family house that was rented for residential. They were storing RVs in the back, and I think the business was also renting U-Hauls. So this represents cleaning up this entire corner in terms of consolidating it into one single development. And again, this is exactly what the specific plan was meant to accomplish. So here is a comprehensive site plan of the entire site. Is in my cursor going, you have the parking structure in the middle, and then it is wrapped or surrounded by different the actual residential units. And this was added earlier this year when the Glendora Auto and Tire was acquired by the developer. The project includes a number of amenities, including a main pool area, a clubhouse. There's a separate large, a couple larger gathering areas for amenities for those who are living on the property. This is where the commercial will exist, as well as a courtyard here. So it's a comprehensive mixed-use development that will, once it's completed, be a community that will serve 280 new residents and their whoever else is living with them in these apartments. What I want to do now to show a little bit about what the project will look like. We showed this simulation at the public hearing when both the Planning Commission and Council looked at it, and I think it's important. It shows the elevations at the street views, as well as some interior elevations as what this will look like. So this is what computers can do nowadays. This is heading east on Route 66, and this is what the finished product will look like. There are two entrances off of Route 66. One is right there where you would enter off into the parking structure. And as you're traveling further east on Route 66, there is another entrance for traffic right as you get right there. And as you can see, this is sort of a Craftsman Ranch style architecture that was chosen for this elevation. And there you have Foothill Christian. This is elevation from North Glendora. Now, the Planning Commission wanted the design and architectural style to be a little bit different than on Route 66. They felt it was important to differentiate the project architecturally because it was so large, so you can see that this elevation has a little bit more of a modern lines and feel to it, although the color scheme and the materials are very similar. Also notice that we, through the changes, we put trees on both sides of the sidewalk, and hopefully there'll be a very nice pedestrian-friendly area that the specific plan, again, is intended to accomplish. Here is the view coming from south on Glendora Avenue, of course, crossing the tracks. And again, you could see the future commercial component that could house a restaurant or something of that nature as we head south on Glendora. Almost to the end. And then next there'll be some, I think, interior shots of the project, as well as examples of what the leasing office will be like and an interior unit. Yeah, so this is what they did was Avalon Bay. This is their leasing office at one of their other properties here in Southern California, and have indicated this is the type of quality and experience that residents will have, at this project. Again, this is a major investment in the community, and these are compared to apartments in this area. These are very, very high-end apartments. And then this is just a example of the interior of what the units look like. This is a fully furnished model unit, but the layout is, comparable to the units that were, and the finishes in the kitchen, etc., are what you're going to see in the units. And like I said before, they're going to try to start leasing the first units in the spring of next year, and I think be aggressive about getting it fully leased by the end of the summer. And these are some of the interior courtyard amenities, the pool area, barbecue lounge areas that'll be part of the interior of this project. This is just some example. I think they include some of their projects. They have outdoor fireplaces, and they're going to include that with this too. And that concludes the video. So let me get a little bit into. Continue with my presentation. I want to the Planning Commission spent a lot of time on this project, and I want to highlight some of the areas where the Commission and the Council spent a lot of time going through and making sure that this project was what was, really hoped for with the specific plan and would, fit within the area. I already talked about the architecture, so I won't do that. There was an added courtyard that wasn't a part of the project before, next to the retail area. At the public hearing, I think there were about 4 to 6 units that were eliminated in this area here, and there was a courtyard where where the retail could have an outdoor dining area or something of that nature, and this was incorporated into the plans. I also would say that originally the applicant had proposed, street parking on both, I think primarily on Glendora Avenue, and I know the council really wanted to soften the experience, and it's really important to have a pedestrian-friendly area. So we eliminated the public parking on Glendora Avenue and Route 66 to provide enough area so you could have street trees at the edge of the street here. So this would be either Route 66 or Glendora. In this case, you have a street tree, a 5-foot sidewalk, some landscaping until you get to the buildings. Even though the buildings themselves are the setback in this subdistrict is a maximum of 10 feet. So the buildings need to be at some point, as close as 10 feet to the property line. So that is what we were working with. Again, it was intended to create more of a street scene experience for pedestrians and allow for this type of development. I also will make a point that the trees have electricity going to them as part of the plans, so that can be used for lighting or what have you down the road. I know that was important. Traffic, we spent a lot of time on traffic, and traffic is always something we hear from the community whenever we do a project of any consequence, regardless of what it is. There are always concerns about traffic. And in this case, we definitely, I wanted to provide some base historical data about traffic at this intersection that I got from the Public Works Department. And then, as you can see, what the first table shows you are years 2005, 13, and 14 in the left column. And these are actual numbers from traffic counts during the AM peak hour and PM peak hour. And interestingly, you'll notice that from 2005 to 2014, it appears that the traffic at this intersection has apparently gone down in terms of raw numbers. I could guesstimate a number of reasons for this. One might be the economic recession occurred. Another might be, I think there was a period here where gas prices went sky high. I think a couple of years ago we were looking at $5 plus a gallon. I think a lot of people at that time started using alternative transportation if they could, or reducing their trips and being more mindful about those things. Could be changes in demographics that are driving this at this area, or it could be an aberration. Needless to say, the numbers are what they were. Yes. Avalon Bay, so you see the numbers roughly in the peak periods. You're hovering between 3,500 and 4,000 cars heading through that intersection during the peak hour. Avalon Bay, again, based on the traffic engineer's analysis of this, the peak hour trips emanating from this project in the morning and the afternoon are 120 cars and 154 cars respectively. And I know that people think, well, how can that be when there's 280 units in this project? There must be 500 cars coming in and out here all within that hour. And that is simply just not the way that traffic behaves and that people's with their schedule behaves. And again, this is information that traffic engineers, their studies are based on, a lot of different studies and data from all over the country that are commonly used as standards, everywhere in the United States pretty much for these types of projects. But nonetheless, it is important to analyze traffic, and the traffic engineer for this project, we looked at 10 intersections around this development, and that's where traffic studies are oriented. It's oriented around intersections and how well they operate and are anticipated to operate with this new development. There were about 3 or 4 recommendations to address the additional traffic from this project, and I will show you, I won't read them, I'll show you what they were in this graphic. This is, it still says Alasta. Well, it says Route 66 Alasta. So it is westbound Route 66. This is Glendora, Route 66. The recommendations of the traffic study were to create a dedicated right turn lane to go north on Glendora, to extend the left turn westbound lane probably for people coming out of the project and heading to the freeway, and to also create a dedicated right turn lane for eastbound Route 66 at Glendora Avenue. Also, there were a number of other things we did to address some of the traffic concerns. There was a comment from the California Public Utilities Commission. This is I believe it's the Public Utilities Commission, which regulates railroads and also, I don't know if it regulates railroads, but the Gold Line it does regulate. And it was concerned about folks either heading north or south on Glendora, and queuing taking place, or for people trying to turn left into this project. So to prohibit that, they required a 100-foot median from the tracks so that to avoid queuing of cars here. There were a few other specific areas that the Planning Commission asked us, in addition to the traffic study analyzing the 10 intersections, as well as the impact of ambient growth in the area, the future Gold Line coming in. They had several other areas that they wanted us to analyze, which we did. And I'll go back and forth to kind of show you what those were. The eastbound left turn pocket on Route 66 east of Glendora. The Commission was concerned that the number of cars at this turning rates given going in who would want to go into the project couldn't be handled. We looked at that issue. That was not a factor or a concern to really have any further mitigations about. The Commission was also concerned about this left turn lane, that it really wasn't long enough for cars wanting to turn left, and the traffic engineer went out and did counts over a several-day period, and while there were some instances where a car couldn't make it through that intersection within one cycle, in 85% plus of the cases that they looked at, they could, and so that's still operating adequately without having to increase the turn signal. Oh, and also lastly, the Commission wanted them to look at potential traffic conflicts between the Albertsons exit as well as the exit out of here, which the traffic engineer did and determined and provided information that this wasn't going to be a conflict for those. We also created a bus cutout. There's going to be a bus stop at this location, a metro or a foothill transit bus stop at that location. Really, just to talk a little bit about the project benefits. We've talked a lot about the project itself and the background on the zoning that makes it possible. Development impact fees, there'll be public infrastructure improvements, which I think primarily include street resurfacing and improvements of almost $220,000. Water impact fees of $636,000. Park development fees of $311,000. The school district will get fees of almost $740,000. I think also, obviously, there's economic benefits to having additional folks at this location. Will obviously help very much the Albertson Shopping Center across the street. It's going to have a direct benefit on the village. Having this new investment here, I think the hope really with projects like this is that they spur other property owners in the area to say, hey, maybe it's time for me to look at doing something with my property. And lastly, I think it represents, an achievement of the, goals of the specific plan that were laid out. We're going on 12 years ago. And again, when a community commits itself to a plan like this, it can take a few decades for things to really change dramatically. We're seeing a few projects right now, and this is just one project, but it's a step in the direction. I also want to, I think, give some credit to Avalon Bay, who had a pretty comprehensive outreach program to the community, particularly to the business community within this area, who were very excited about the prospect of having 280 new residential units in their proximity, and were able to go out and get written support from many of those folks who were in the surrounding area. And so with that, I'm happy. I conclude my oral report here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Director Kugel. That was a very interesting report on a very sort of complex development, so appreciate it. Any questions?
The Route 66 specific plan runs from Barranca on the west all the way out to Lone Hill,
Amelia.
on the east. Can you go into some detail about the various districts that were built into that plan, and specifically how much of the total area, if you know, is going to be delegated to this town center mixed use, where we have the high density residential? In other words, the entire Alasta Corridor or Route 66 specific plan is not designed to be developed as high density residential.
It's not, and I think that with this property is probably uniquely configured to accommodate this type of housing product. To kind of answer your question, beginning from Barranca is the area which does really there you have your Barranca Gateway area, you have a Grand Gateway area, then you get into, and the Grand Gateway and Barranca Gateway areas allow a mix of commercial and residential uses, but at lower densities and intensity of development than the town center mixed use. You get to about, I'm going to say Parker, just past Grand Avenue. And by the way, the Route 66 specific plan goes all the way south on Grand Avenue to Baseline. Okay? You get to about Parker, and that's where the town center mixed use kicks in, which is really your transit-oriented development. This is really visioning around the Gold Line station, having mixed-use development, having incentives for, height and density that accommodate projects, like the one you saw tonight. And that goes, I'm going to say, along Route 66, when you get to Glendora, this sub-district goes all the way north to Foothill. And it goes south, I believe, to about Colorado. Then heading east, you get to about Pasadena, and that's pretty much where the residential part of the specific plan ends. There is where between Elwood, going west a couple blocks on the south side of the street, where there are some existing apartments and condominiums, where there's residential. But pretty much when you get to Pasadena, that's where you get into what's the route service commercial zone, which is all light industrial, commercial, retail. Then when you get to about Lone Hill, going east, it transitions into the high-tech office corridor area. And again, no residential in that. So that is, I'll explain that in more detail and better in December, but that gives you, I think, hopefully a visual of how the corridor is divided up.
Actually, on your page 276, there's actually a map, and of the total area, 287 acres, only 95 acres is TCMU.
Okay, so 290.
Almost 290 acres for the whole Route 66.
Okay, so roughly 1/3 is going to be town center mixed use or high density residential.
Potentially.
Potentially.
Yes.
Okay.
Joe?
Yeah, I think to follow up with that, Chris, in order to get this Avalon Bay project, how many, I know they showed it on the presentation, but what was it, 12 different parcels of property?
There was 13 different parcels, including off there that had to be not just Avalon, but Morgan Group initially consolidated for their 3-point-odd acres, and then Avalon added to that. So in total, there's about 13 parcels that had to come together, which was symbolic of what the Alasta committee and the specific plan looked at was that dominates all of Route 66, which was a common theme back in the 40s and 50s of parcelization, that individual businesses or properties, if they only needed 40 by 50, that's all the city gave them. And a whole different mentality when land use planning was being done by there as opposed to now. But that's one of the difficulties that those two committees saw, was the extreme numbers of parcels that were there that would have to be purchased and inhibited private investment from occurring because of the numerous property owners that would be need to be engaged to make something significant.
And how many, does anybody know how many, what were the parcels that were on the large portion that were purchased in 2004? How many, do you know what was there? Doug might know.
There was a Dodge dealership, there was a large RV maintenance and repair facility, and for want of a better term, junkyard. I think behind Dr. Strange's animal clinic, that might have been the junkyard, the RV storage thing. I don't know that there was anything else back there besides the car dealership and that repair facility, and that bordered on the north to
Can you put that map back, Ariel?
to that northern property that runs along the
shotgun piece.
the BNSF
Rifle.
right of way.
And again, you can see throughout this the very odd-shaped parcels that have been created over the years. You had both the Midas and Dr. Strange's vet clinic were very shallow box. Again, they're all non-conforming under today's standards lots. You had what I call the rifle property, but it was the auto repair. It was then progressed into a contractor's office building. But you can see it stretched all along the gold line, and you couldn't build anything there as a standalone, just given that process. You had the stereo shop that this agency bought at that time. Again, it was non-conforming, had no parking on the place. It was well known for businesses coming in and out because of those deficiencies of no parking. So customers had to park long ways away to walk to it. You had the tire and brake had multiple uses on it. These were all types of hurdles that those committees saw, that trying to figure out a way, if private investment's going to be enticed to come in, at what break point does it make sense for somebody to purchase a business? And I say purchasing a business versus purchasing a house is completely different. A house, you're buying the structure and land. With a business, you're not only buying structure, land, but you're buying the business that somebody's moving. So their operations off that. So there's a third element that goes into costing out that, which drives up the cost. So those two committees, I think, tussled, and we always tussle with that, is how do you balance that breaking point of where it makes sense for new investment to come into your community, make that investment so that they can make a fair return, or not. And that's why some of these density bonuses were looked at, in addition to what Mr. Kugel talked about with the future goal line, that the state planning authorities are pushing communities to build higher densities around transit-oriented spots, and so forth, for environmental reasons and other infrastructure reasons. So it's a combination of many things that comes into that, but had the Morgan Group been built, I think the community would have had regrets that these other parcels not come along, because there would not have been enough incentive for private investment to come in and build units and pay the price for those properties that a fair property owner would want off that. You couldn't build the units necessary to do that as standalone projects. So we would have been stuck with those 3 properties to the north and the 2 properties to the south, and they would have been there almost perpetuity, and I think it would have done a big disservice to us in the long run from a land use planning, and that's one of the goals of the specific plan, is to consolidate, entice people to consolidate lots.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Joe. I served on the Alasta Corridor Committee and then subsequently on the Route 66 Specific Plan Committee. If you look at this picture that's up here, and just to the right of the green box that was acquired from Glendora Tire and Brake, then you've got Foothill Christian. Then there's a medical building that is just a block east, or a block west of, not a block, a parcel west of Pasadena. And as I recall what you said, the Pasadena is the eastern boundary of the town center mixed use.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. If you look up at the top and you see the Burlington Northern Santa Fe / Gold Line right-of-way, you notice, again, to right about Pasadena, it comes down to its closest proximity to Route 66. All of those parcels to the east of there are limited in their development potential by the fact that you've got the right-of-way up there. All the original parcels on Route 66, because of the nature of that highway, were designed to be either motel uses, automotive repair uses, fast food restaurant uses, all businesses that required very, very small parcels. As you say, that's all that, when somebody wanted to buy one of those parcels, they just bought what they needed and away you went. So the problem that we've always had in developing Route 66 into a viable, attractive, modern commercial corridor had to do with the fact that we were reliant on the what do we used to call that? The business
Community Redevelopment Agency.
Community Redevelopment Agency. Now we don't have that tool. And so the ability for any particular developer to come in and try and accumulate properties without the assistance of the city and the redevelopment agency is very, very limited, because you've got, for every acre, you probably have to deal with a half a dozen different property owners, that any one of which may or may not be interested in selling. And so, since this project, these parcels were largely acquired when we had redevelopment, I would think that this is likely one of the very last projects of this type that we're ever going to be able to develop.
I would agree, especially for this density and height, it's going to be one of the last. I know I was talking to one of the council members before. Our other developments, Jeff talked about, this is 50 units to the acre. And so this is sort of a unique situation. And again, that 50 units was needed in order to bridge that point where you have a willing buyer and a willing seller to make things. I mean, none of this property was done through eminent domain. It was always through mutual reached agreements between a buyer and a seller. The other projects we've talked about approving, Laterra, the Glendora station by the post office, the one City Ventures project, Foothill 555, those are all densities of between 16 units to 18, 19 units per acre. If you looked at 18 or 19 units on this 5 acres, you'd be talking about 85 units. You could. That's why private investment wouldn't go in. They couldn't make that return in order for that to occur for 85 units on this. So those properties are much bigger and probably cheaper to acquire in order to allow them to move forward off that. I mean, it's simple capitalism 101. If somebody's going to make that risk of investment, they have to have a rate of return sufficient for them to do it, and otherwise, without the CRA agencies, that's really what we're beholden on, is how do we balance that effort to make the incentives just right without going overboard, but balancing it so that you do attract new investment. Otherwise, Alasta, Route 66 will not change for our children or our children's children. It will be what it is. And I think the community has spoken several times that as a major corridor that defines Glendora to the rest of the world and the rest of the valley and the rest of this region, we need to upgrade that corridor because it's not really Glendora going forward. It was the old Glendora, but we need to make a new feel for the world to see Glendora differently.
So this is if I understand this is a 20-year collection of property put together to make this site viable. The businesses that were on here, I think it's interesting that back in 2004, that the community meetings or the community committees had a vision that said these properties are not going to get any better over the years. They're actually going to deteriorate and get much worse. And if we don't put some mechanism in there to consolidate them, well then we're just going to be, it's just going to be a terrible situation. Kind of what we see over there with the Naked Juice property, where the roofs are collapsing, where they're overgrown, there's nobody there, there are people doing bad things in the parking lot back there, and it just seems to me that this is kind of an extension of that. And I think it's I think that the 20 years that it took to put this together, is that even possible in any other part of this corridor? In today, that would allow the developer the additional credits for when it comes to density and when it comes to all of the additional things, height of the buildings. Does this, in fact, is there another part, I don't think, around in town that they could take and put 12 pieces of property together and, in fact, get the bonuses that this property has?
Well, not that many parcels. The bonuses, again, in theory, are possible, but as you've seen through actual cases now with City Ventures at Post Office, Laterra down there, and the other places, it's not happening because they don't need those bonuses in order for them to pencil out and bring that investment for those properties. And I would say those properties are the bulk of what remains in the TCMU. The other big parcel I see potentially being developed in this TCMU zone area is probably the RV lot behind Albertsons on Vermont there. But again, I don't see much else happening off that area. But in theory, I want to stand corrected. The zoning does allow if the project meets certain things, but the reality, my experience over these last 34 years and just what's happening in the projects we're seeing, this is the last project you're going to see like this in Glendora for 25 more years.
Okay, then I
But
just
that
have
store-
okay.
Just real quick, that storage lot that you were talking about on Vermont really wouldn't be applicable to or lend itself to use the density or height bonuses because there's not any other properties to accumulate.
Correct.
Am I correct?
I just have two more questions, and it deals with water, and it deals with the schools, the funding that's going to the water. It's $636,000 for them to hook up to the to the water system here, right? I mean, that's what the report says. But I'm interested in what's the impact on the water service, because we've got a lot of questions from people that have concerns, and rightfully so, about well, all these people are going to put us over the top for water. All of these additional people, we don't have enough water now. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that so that we can at least find out the strategy or that the city has when it comes to the water issue.
And it's a very good question. You know, it's multifaceted. Let me start with that. All new residential development has to pay what we call the water impact fee, which allows us to collect funds for us to go out and either purchase water rights or lease long-term water rights. So, and I think as we've said before, I don't know of any other city that has a water impact fee like that. They have a capital fee maybe for upgrades for water lines or things like that they may do, but this is the only community I know of that has one where we require new residential to pay an impact fee for us to go get water rights to, in theory, offset what they will take or use for their new residential development. On top of that, it's also important to note that all new development, unlike all the development that's already here, under the green code or the building code section that's adopted by California, they already have to demonstrate that they're going to use 20% less than already established residential properties. So they're going to do that through, I think as you heard about the project on Arrow Highway, through landscaping improvements. You know, there's no lawns anymore. If you look at these new developments, go right down to the project by the post office, you won't see a blade of grass. It's all that drought-tolerant California-style landscaping. So these developments all have that. They use the latest utensils inside the units. So the dishwashers are the most water efficient, shower heads of that, faucets, water heaters, all those things they have to show through the green code that they're reducing water consumption. So not only do we make them pay a fee equivalent to without that, so that they were just like any other residential development similar, but then we make them start reducing by 20%. From that standpoint. So that is some of the things that they have to go through in order to make sure that they don't tax our water system any more than not from that.
Thank you. And the last question I had is I hear about the impact on our school district, what's going to happen, how many kids are going to be going to our schools, how are we going to find classrooms for them and stuff like that. And I'm looking at the numbers, and it looks like that the school district's going to get about $740,000. And I think there's, 7,700 students? And it looks to me like that $740,000 equals about $90 per student to improve the school district. And as I understand, I guess it can go for facilities, for athletics, for automation. Am I correct with all that?
Yeah, and state law allows school districts to develop impact fees. Glendora Unified School, I don't know of any school district in the state of California that hasn't developed it. But they have a impact fee of a little over, for multifamily, $2 per square foot that's built. And for Avalon Bay, as you pointed out, they wrote a check for about $740,000. And that can only be used for capital type items. So new playgrounds, air conditioning in classrooms, maintenance to the classrooms, can be used for everything but salaries for school districts. So, and that decision of how it's made is made, of course, by the school board of GOSD. Through these developments, all these developments we've looked at, we're generating just under about $4 million for Glendora Unified School District through these impact fees for them, which is a pretty substantial improvement to the schools for all Glendora children. Whether they're part of this new development or not, everyone's going to benefit from those dollars that the school board ultimately allocates for improvements to the schools.
Okay, now, the last thing, Gene, I know.
No, go ahead.
I think this has been a great presentation, and I think that this presentation, at least to maybe clarify and allow people to see what we're seeing here tonight, I think that we ought to put this on our website and give access to this presentation 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, because even sitting here and going through all of the documents over the time, there's still additional information that that Jeff put out tonight that that kind of puts the light on and says, oh, well, then that's why they're doing that, okay? And I just think that it's information we should share to the public, and maybe it generates additional questions, but maybe it gives additional some answers to them that we normally wouldn't, we wouldn't even know about. So it's just a suggestion, and if the council wants to do it, I think would be something that would be beneficial. I know we have the video, part of the video, on the website right now, and it just shows eastbound on Route 66. But the different views that you see here, I put some life to it and shows what it's really going to look like when it's done.
Well, we'll put a link to this particular agenda item from the meeting. Again, all of our meetings are 24/7 on the web page already, but we'll put a link under current projects for this particular one and the other two that we've presented, the Glendora Station project and Monrovia Nursery project
great.
under their categories too.
Appreciate it. Sorry, Gene, go ahead.
No, I wanted to touch, when you were talking about the school impact fees, it reminded me that we often hear, that with this development, especially this development, how are our schools going to handle the influx of students? If we remember back less than 3 years ago, I want to say the Glendora Unified School District had to enter into District of Choice because we were going through declining enrollment. This, and closed the school as a result of it. This type of development would eventually start to allow us to be less reliant as a school district on out-of-district students and more on our own. So I think that the idea that our schools are overcrowded, there's another part to that has to be considered. The second thing is, we talked about the Alasta Corridor Committee, and I was glad to hear that you were on it, Doug. Was that an open forum? Was there public workshops that were held where you got community input? How was that organized?
It was set up as essentially an ad hoc committee. As I recall, there were at least one, maybe more council members. I wasn't on the council at the time. Various members of the community were selected. Volunteers, I don't remember exactly. It seems to me this was in 1999, maybe.
You had public meetings, and you even had an inaugural 1 mile run on Route 66
that's correct.
to try to get community interest and support in the plan and to come to those meetings. So I was not on the council at that time either, but went to some of those community meetings and also went to that one
Yeah,
mile run
I
you put
forget
on.
how many meetings we had, but it was, it went on for a couple of years. If I remember correctly, we spent almost $400,000 with the various studies that we completed in order to come up with a recommended plan for the entire district. And of course, at the time we were counting very heavily on redevelopment agencies, and that was the way we were going to accumulate parcels to solve some of these problems. And one of the major goals of that whole project was to bring in high-tech businesses because of our proximity to major colleges in the area, and that this was a way that we could bring in jobs, and do it in a clean fashion so that the environment was protected and the city of Glendora was improved and became what we all wanted it to be, which was not what Route 66 was back in the day that we all think about so fondly.
Last question I had, Jeff. I've heard oftentimes that this is Section 8 housing or is low income. Is there any component to that in this?
No, I hear that a lot too. It's not. It's completely market rate housing, and in fact, the rents in this are for 2-bedroom units are going to approach $2,000 a month, and so there is no low income, no Section 8, no subsidies of any kind from the city or any other agency to make it low income. It's 100% market rate, as is every other development currently going on in the city.
And again, and I'll turn it over. No variances allowed on this property or given on this property.
There were no variances given on the project.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Kugel, for your very comprehensive report on this. There's that old adage about that is a glass half empty or half full. And I think that, yes, we've gotten comments, negative ones about this, but we've also gotten a lot of positive ones. It's always easier for people to come forward with the negative than the positive. We find that in all of life. But just yesterday, as the dentist was drilling away at my mouth, he said, said, that project on the corner of Glendora and 66, I had heard a lot of rumors about it. What was that big structure going to be, that it was going to be low-income housing? He said, so I went to the city webpage, and I looked up the information about it and looked at the video and saw that it's going to be a very nice project, and I'm very excited about it. So thank you very much. And so I think that when people look for the facts, that they can find them and find that maybe things really aren't what they're often said to be. A few weeks ago, I was in line at some store, and an older gentleman came up behind me and asked if I was on the city council, and I said yes. And he said, wow, he said, I wanted to say how cool it is. And I don't think he used the word cool. I think he said something more along the lines of that he was very excited when he saw the big crane at the project at Glendora and 66. He said, that's how we used to build things in the old days. He said, I haven't seen one of those around for a long time. He said, I go over and park nearby there and watch it because it's so fascinating, and that was the way we used to do things. So I think that we can look to the negative, we can look to the positive. I think that finding the facts, and as one of our speakers pointed out tonight, it's that time of the year when maybe a lot more misinformation gets circulated than correct information. So I would encourage people to find facts about these projects because there are a lot of important facts out there. And I think all 5 of us, I can confidently say that while we might disagree on some things, that the one thing that all 5 of us agree on is that we love the city of Glendora and want to promote those things that make our city the great place that it is to live, work, and play. So I think when we decided on this project that we had that in mind, that we wanted to allow housing for current residents that they could afford and enjoy. I've had young adults say to me, wow, I'm looking forward to having those nice apartments. And that we also would invite other people to come and live in our city and enjoy what we all love about this city. So I think that this project keeps that in mind, that our responsibility is to look at the bigger picture for 55,000 plus residents. And so I think that, yeah, we can focus on the negative or we can focus on the positive. So thank you for highlighting those things tonight.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you all for your comments. I have a couple questions, Jeff. The parking structure facade, is there going to be anything different on the outside of that parking structure, or is it as it is?
On the back side, there will be a lot of different. I'm not sure it will be painted on the outside, on the other sides, but you're not going to be able to really see it other than from the rear.
And the front entrance, you actually do see it, but is that right, or are there units in front of it?
There will be units in front of it. As you can kind of see from this picture here on the screen, the entrance is here, and there are units above the entrance.
So you'll go around those units?
You'll go underneath them.
Under the units to get
Right.
into it. So okay. The only place that's really going to be visible is coming south on Glendora Avenue,
Yeah, and you'll be able to see the rear of the structure.
and it'll have some treatment on it?
Yeah, they're doing different types of I don't want to say wrought iron because I don't think that's right. Sometimes with structures you'll have different types of metal elements, design elements on the back with like a creeping type of vine or something to soften the look of the structure. That's what you'll see from the rear.
Okay. And you said that they're looking to start occupying it by getting it occupied by spring.
Yes.
Will it be completed then, or are they going to start doing it before it's finished?
I believe that they will start occupying some of the units before it's completely finished.
Okay. So by summer it should be completed.
Right. So they're going to occupy much like a for sale project occupies in phases. They will occupy this in phases.
Okay. And they did that to the village next to the post office too.
Right.
Occupied and kept building.
Mm-hmm.
And then, could you explain why the setback is so limited? No more than 10 feet setback is what the Alasta plan calls for, or Route 66 plan calls for.
Yeah, the idea with the specific plan in terms of creating, that sort of pedestrian environment, in traditional, I'll call it, let's say, mid-century type of commercial development, you had a huge parking field, and then, think of your big box type of retailer, which is very car-oriented and car-intensive. You have to get into a car, you have to park in a parking lot, and then you probably have to walk. When you go to the indoor mall that they were building through the 70s and 80s, you had to maybe walk a half a mile to get to the Gap from your parking space, which, I suppose you're walking, but it's not really the idea here was to place the buildings close to the street with commercial and residential all within walking distance, and to have that in combination with landscaping to create a particular type of street look and feel. When you're driving down the street, also, not only a pedestrian, you're not just looking at fields of parking, you're looking at nice architecture when you're driving down the street. And I think that's hard for people to get used to, but the one example, or the best example in Glendora where that occurs, and I think people love it, is the Village. I mean, all of those buildings are up right against the sidewalk. And why is it great? Because it allows you to stroll the Village and, shop in the stores, look, there's landscaping, etc. It's nicer to drive down. That's exactly the kind of thing, on a larger scale, although that the specific plan with those shorter setbacks is intending to achieve.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to public
I-
comment. Yes?
If I can, one question. Jeff, how is that 10-foot setback calculated? Is it from the
It's a property line.
property line? So it's not the curb
It's
going
not the
in.
curb because the property line is about 8 feet behind the curb.
Curb. So it's going to be about 18 feet then from street to...
Roughly, yeah.
Okay. Does that include eaves or building frontage?
It's building frontage, and it fluctuates between, I think there's